So this engine is running and everything seems to be very smooth. The only error that I'm getting is the error saying that this oil pressure solenoid is disconnected. And I'll have to see whether that affects the OBD readiness. If it affects the OBD readiness, then we'll have to take additional steps. I don't know what that will be, but I don't think it's going to affect that. There's no other error codes on the car. When I took the engine out, I accidentally pulled the torque converter a bit too far and a bunch of oil leaked out onto the driveway. So what I've done is gone through the ZF oil level check procedure, which you can find other videos on, and I had to add a quart of oil. That wasn't a serious issue. So to get this engine in has taken about a week. After I put the engine into the bay, I worked every day for a couple of hours before work, assembling all the components. It's an enormous amount of work to reassemble everything in this engine bay. There's just an astonishing amount of pipes and wiring and peripherals and things. It's extremely difficult to get to all these alternator, power steering pump, and AC compressor on the left side of the engine. So two tools that I needed, I had to actually fabricate this number 12 Torx wrench, and this number 13 flex head is essential for getting to those bolts on the AC compressor. And then of course the procedure is very difficult because you've got to assemble things in just the right order or else you start over. It's a very difficult assembly, this. If you haven't worked on an engine before, I would not try doing this BMW. It's the most difficult thing I've ever worked on. It's literally mind-blowing how complicated and obscure and weird and difficult every single thing is on this engine. So, if you are attempting this job, just be prepared for the most arduous suffering. I mean, it's more difficult than running the Boston Marathon or anything like that. This is real hell to get this thing in. And something else I noticed is that when I started the engine, it was leaking oil like crazy through the rear main seal. And the reason is because the front of the car was jacked up, so all the oil was pushed against the back of the rear main seal before it had properly seated, I think. I can't understand the reason for that. But it started leaking, and now that I've driven the car, but the leaking has stopped completely. So it seems like the rear main seal needs a little bit of time to seat correctly. So if it's leaking initially, it doesn't mean that you've done an incorrect installation. Now, of course, you do have to make sure that the surface area of that rear crank flange is polished properly, like I did in my previous video, or else you're not going to get a good seal. But actually, there are no other leaks in this. I was very careful to replace every single O-ring. For the turbocharger coolant lines, and there's some other lines, these are the correct O-rings to use. These are available on Amazon, and these are Viton O-rings. So you want the Viton O-rings, not some other kind of O-ring, because they degrade over time if they're not Viton. This is the cheap brand of oil drainage line from the turbocharger. It doesn't fit, and don't get this because this hole doesn't line up. I don't know what brands. I would get the expensive brand or the BMW. When I started this up for the first time, I disconnected this line here, and I put a plastic bag around this steel pipe, and stuffed it with rags and put rags everywhere to catch the fuel. And then what I did is I ran the engine. I started the engine for just 3 seconds, and that was enough to prime the entire fuel system without getting too much fuel in the engine bay. So that's an easy way to prime the fuel system. Otherwise the engine is going to take a long time to start as the fuel circulates through the system. So after I did that, I started the engine again, and it started first time, so with no code. So everything was correct. So you've got to aim with these engines in my opinion, for a first time start. You've got to make sure absolutely everything is perfect. This idea when people assemble an engine and they accidentally get connectors plugged in the wrong place and switch connectors around, that makes your life a real nightmare. Make sure that absolutely everything is perfect before you try and start the engine, so that you know it's going to start first time. That was the goal, and I managed to achieve that. Everything worked first time. The engine was very noisy to start off with because a lot of the hydraulic lifters probably did not have any oil in them, so it made a bit of a noise on startup, but that quickly went away. So I attached this industrial oil pressure sensor in place of the oil pressure switch over here before I started the engine. And then what I did is I put that sensor so the dial actually was against the windscreen, and I watched that thing as I started the car for the first time, because obviously you want to make sure that you've got oil pressure, otherwise you've got a serious problem. You've got to cut the engine. So when I started, this was interesting because there's no regulator, so I was interested to see what would happen. So when I started the engine, the oil pressure initially bumped up beyond the range of the dial. So that was over 7 bar of pressure, which is 100 psi, and then it bounced up to that level, and then it went down to about 6 bar, and it stayed there. And then when I was happy that the engine had oil pressure, then I cut everything off and I warmed up the car. I changed oil immediately to get all the junk out, and I put in 50 grade oil. So putting an oil pressure sensor in, an oil pressure dial gauge in, is an essential step, because if you don't have oil pressure, you're going to destroy the engine on your first startup. So I made this shroud out of high temperature epoxy resin and fiberglass, and this prevents any water dripping onto the engine, which causes corrosion in your injector tubs. I think it's an important reliability step. So this cherry pick is actually not long enough to get this engine out. I actually had to put the chain out the front like this, and actually I drilled another hole to make this even longer than it's safe to do. But the engine isn't that heavy, so I think this is fine. But it was almost to the point where it might have been out of balance and tipping over. So that's it's a bit dangerous, but it seemed to work fine, and I was able to get the extra few inches I needed to get this thing over the radiator. So for all this wiring, a lot of these wire loom sheaths were broken up and the wires were exposed, so I fixed all of that. So Mauser obviously has wire loom like this, but it was very difficult to find. On Amazon, they were selling this high temperature made in China wire loom, which looked perfectly good, and it comes in different sizes. So I bought this and I used it to fix all the looms. The procedure I follow is to use this BMW friction tape, and I wrap this around the wire, and then I put the loom on, the shielding the sheath on the outside, and then I wrap this again, and then I put a high temperature cable tie on it. The cable ties you cannot use regular cable ties in an engine bay because they're not heat resistant. You have to get the special ones from Mauser, which are heat resistant and a little expensive. So all these things are heat resistant. This is heat resistance. This is heat resistance, and the cable ties that I've got from Mauser are heat resistant. So these cable ties look exactly like regular cable ties, except they can handle, I think, up to 150 degrees Celsius or something like that. They're very high temperature. So the only thing left is to put the covers back on the engine. There's those covers, and obviously there's this cover, which can go in there. And I guess we're done. There's a few more videos that I haven't uploaded yet. of intermediate steps and tips. So I'll just go through those and see what to upload. But I think this project is complete. The only thing is to report back on whether the OBD readiness is affected by the oil pressure sensor, and to finish up the discussion about the oil pressure, the oil pumps, and the whole issue with oil starvation and what my investigation revealed, and I've got something to say about that. Anyway, that's all for now.